What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to let you know that now that my neck is feeling much better and that I've figured out a better recording schedule, we will be returning to the regular schedule we had before, so that would be Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday with normal videos, Wednesday and Friday with longer 2-hour mega mixes, and Sunday with the weekly compilation. If you guys end up enjoying this 1-hour video, please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. All of that really helps to ensure the videos do well and that I can continue making these videos daily for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts on the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below. Although I may not always have time to respond to them, I do read every single one of them. Without further ado though guys, I will let you get right into the scary stories, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. I'll see you again at the end. I was out hiking one day, just trying to explore and have a good time. That was what I did with my spare time. Wasn't much of an indoors guy really. I almost sometimes wonder if people know how much is out there that there is to explore. Whenever I go out, I'm always able to find a new place or look around for new things. My family lived out in the middle of the country. There was a lot of property around that area and very few houses, so I could go out in search of things all the time, and I'd always find something new. It was fall when I was out exploring, and thus it was a little chilly that day. It was also overcast with clouds, dark and moving quickly in the sky. There was no indication of rain though, so I wasn't worried about possibly getting wet or there being a storm. On this day, I had gone further out than I'd ever gone before, so I had to be careful. There were various things out there, such as electric fences and even some barbed wire ones as well. The brush was so thick in places that I hadn't noticed some of these obstacles before and found myself unexpectedly shocked or stuck with barbs. This was no exception because of how thick the vegetation was in some places. I had seen old structures out in the hills, and even came across a barn that was likely still being used in the middle of a clearing. Those were my favorite sorts of things to see when I was out exploring. I always liked to wonder when they'd last been used, and what they had possibly been used for. This time, I had been out for quite a while. The weather that I described was also my favorite kind of weather, so I wasn't about to head home early. This was the perfect day to remain out and about. Suddenly, though, I heard a really strange noise. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. I was quite certain it must be some sort of animal, but not an animal I'd ever encountered before, just a really inhuman sort of wail. There weren't supposed to be many dangerous animals out in the hills I lived in, or so my parents told me, so I wanted to check out what this was. I began walking in the direction of that strange noise I'd heard. I heard it a few more times as well, so I was able to figure out I was going in the right direction. I kept following that noise. I began thinking it must have been some sort of animal in distress or something. Maybe it had gotten caught in a barbed wire fence, or some sort of animal trap. If so, I definitely wanted to see if I could help it. However, as I got closer to where the sound was coming from, I noticed what looked like an old shed up ahead of me. It was obviously very old, probably left over from people who'd previously owned and worked on this land. It wasn't very big, and to be honest, I was surprised it was even still holding together after how shabby it looked. I heard the wail once more. There was no doubt about it at this point. Whatever was making this strange noise was inside of this shed. I almost stopped and turned the other way. I didn't want to be that regretful guy from a scary movie who stumbles upon something he wishes he hadn't, but I was way too curious to find out what was making this noise. I cautiously approached the shed, and as I got closer, I noticed there was a glassless window in the door of it. It was probably no bigger than a soup bowl. I figured I could sneak in a good look before deciding to open the door. That way, if it was dangerous, I could just get right out of there with no risk. As I got closer to the shed, I accidentally kicked a rock in front of me. The rock flew up and hit the door. I winced, but nothing else seemed to happen. It had just made a strange knocking sound, and that was all. When I got up close and tried to peek through the little window, though, now I saw there was clearly an eyeball looking back at me. I froze. I began to hear some really scary and insane mumblings from inside the shed. Someone was talking to themselves, but although I could tell this was a person now, they were completely unintelligible. The door opened, and a face peeped out of the doorframe. I was only able to see the top half of their face, but it was unlike any person I'd ever seen before. They were so pale, they were bald, and they had the scariest, most insane eyes I had ever seen. In a strained voice, I was finally able to make out what it was saying. They were quietly screaming at me to get away. Terrified at the sound of this voice, I broke away from it and began running. I didn't want this person to come after me. The voice had been so scary and threatening that it caused me to panic and run. There was no telling how I'd react if I had seen the full person. I got far away before I slowed down. I was quite worried about what I had seen. I thought about it until I got home, and every now and then when I was out in the woods, I couldn't help but think about it again. Strangely enough, there were times where my curiosity got the best of me, and I attempted to go back and find that shed again. I wondered if whoever had been inside was still there, but I was never able to find it again. Part of me was relieved at this, I have to admit. I never used to get much mail when I was younger, and still living at home. I didn't really send out for things or have any pen pals or the like. Of course, I was also a kid, so I didn't have any bills in my name or anything. Didn't get those either. And because of that, whenever something did come in the mail for me, it was a pretty big deal. There was a period of time, though, when I received several things in the mail that gave me the most terrifying time in my life. I was 17 years old when this happened. I was a senior in high school, and I was an only child. Both of my parents worked, and I would always get home from school before they arrived. That meant I would usually get a few hours to myself before they came home. The mail usually came while I was away at school, so I would always grab it before my parents arrived. One day, I was sorting through the mail when I noticed there was a letter addressed to me. Like I mentioned, this was not the sort of thing I was used to, and therefore I had no idea what this could possibly be. When I opened up the envelope, there was a single folded sheet of paper inside it. I unfolded it and was surprised to find it was completely blank. There was no return address on the letter, and therefore I had no clue who had sent it. It was weird and a little unnerving as well. Still, it's not like it was the hugest deal. I put it out of my mind until my parents got home. I showed them the empty letter, though, and they were a bit surprised too. Just like me, they didn't think it was anything to worry about. Perhaps someone had written me a letter and folded up the wrong sheet of paper on accident and sent it in that envelope. I think it was about a week later when I received another letter in the mail. It wasn't too long after the first one had arrived. When I opened this one up, it actually had some writing on it, but the content was not what I was expecting. The letter read something like this: "I really enjoyed seeing you at school today. I didn't know you walked home. Maybe I'll give you a ride someday." Okay, that was quite different than the first one I received, but it was still very confusing. Like before, it was not signed, and there was no return address for it either. I could only assume it was from the same author of the first letter. When I told my parents about it this time, they gave me a little ribbing for it. They thought I must have a secret admirer from school. They tried to drill me to see if I could think of who it may have been, but I really had no idea. I wouldn't have thought it could have been any of my friends because they all knew I walked home from school. This time I thought more about it than I had before. I was just more curious, really, if it may have been someone I knew or not. Over the next few weeks, I would get the occasional letter in the mail from this person. It would always be just a couple of lines mentioning something that happened in school. For example, there was one where they congratulated me for running the fastest mile in gym class. I didn't really narrow it down though, because those classes were huge. I did start looking around in gym, trying to see if anyone was watching me. After receiving several of these strange letters in the mail, they began to lose their charm. I began to get more weirded out than anything else. All these letters would mention things from my daily school life, and it was starting to get creepy. This person was obviously paying a whole lot of attention to me, and I began feeling like eyes were on me all the time. In short, the letters were beginning to feel stalkerish and were making me feel quite paranoid. It all came to a head one day when I came home from school. Instead of a letter, there was a package laying on the porch this time. It was really small, but I did recognize the handwriting. It was from the person who had been sending me letters. This was the first package, though. When I opened it, there was no letter inside. All that was inside was one of those Ginsu knives that were popular back in the 90s. It had blood on it. I made the choice not to tell my parents about it. I didn't want to worry them. I was paranoid enough concerning what was going on, and I didn't want to make things any worse. I didn't get anything else in the mail until the following week. When I did, it was another package. I dreaded opening it because of what had been in the last one. My curiosity got the better of me, though, and eventually I opened it. The smell was horrendous. There was a plastic container inside, and inside that container was a dead and decaying bird. There was a letter attached too. Can you guess why the knife I sent you was bloody? Well, this time I had to tell my parents. They of course called the police, and we had to fill out a police report. Since there was no way of telling who had sent it to me though, there wasn't much they could do about it. If I had been paranoid before, I went through a long period of time being scared. I was scared at school. I was scared when walking home from school. I was scared at home alone until my parents got home from work. I could never feel safe until then. I was paranoid, waiting for another letter or package to come in the mail with a gruesome discovery. Every day on the walk home from school, I would dread it. Strangely enough, though, I never did get anything else in the mail from that person. I never figured out who it was. This was back in the 90s, and I've never heard from that person again. I have no clue who it may have been. In my teen years, I had always wanted a car. The thing is, although my family was not broke by any means, they couldn't afford to get me one. Plus, we lived in a rural area where there was no place for me to get a job. My parents worked quite a lot, so they didn't have the time or free schedule to get me to and from work. Having a decent car wasn't really in the cards. My dad and I both enjoyed working on them though, so we bought this really old Mustang that wasn't running, and we spent a lot of time working on it. It definitely needed a whole lot of work done to it, but when it was done, I would have a car to get around with, hopefully. My parents were away for a week at one point, visiting some relatives. I didn't want to go with them because I wanted to spend that time getting my car working. I felt like I was close to having it finished, and then I would finally have my own transportation. One evening, I was working really late into the night when I finally got the car to start. I was so excited by this that I decided to take it for a little test drive. There were only hills and gravel roads around me, so I didn't really have to worry about running into anyone. I felt like I could drive around as much as I wanted to, and I did. I drove all throughout those hills, thrilled to have my vehicle now working. I wasn't planning on going anywhere in particular, just driving around and enjoying myself really. It was getting dark before I'd first headed out, and it was definitely dark for the majority of the time I was driving around. Right when I was going down a road I had never been on before, the worst possible thing happened. The car suddenly died on me. I had all my tools in the car, luckily, so I tried to figure out what went wrong. I was positive I could fix it. What I came to discover was that the fuel gauge was broken and I had run out of gas. Since there was no way of fixing that, I would have to walk my way back home and return with a gas canister. The only issue was that I wasn't sure how long it was going to take me to get home. I knew I could find my way, sure. It's not like those roads branched off many times, if ever. The only problem was it was very dark, and I wasn't exactly sure how far away I was. I was fortunate to have my flashlight with me, but it wasn't a very strong one. That made it still sort of scary. After I had been walking down these dark roads for a while, I began hearing some noises out in the woods. I thought it was probably an animal or something walking out there, so I tried to just put it out of my mind. I kept hearing it while I was walking, though, and began wondering what was making these footfalls. I shined my flashlight out into the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of what this could be. I wasn't able to even see a shadow or anything. I kept trying to convince myself that it had just been an animal, and I guess I really thought that it was. Your mind can really play tricks on you, especially when you're walking a dark and lonely road in the middle of the night. In such circumstances, it's only natural to suspect a person might be following you. This went on for quite a while. I don't know exactly how long the walk took me to get home, but the entire way, I was hearing that noise. Occasionally, it would get a little quiet for a short period of time, only to pick back up again. I tried not to let it bother me, but the entire walk home I was scared out of my mind. When I finally got back, it was well past midnight. Even if it hadn't been, though, there was no way I was going to go back to that car until it was light out. I decided to take myself a shower and go to bed. I had to go into the basement in order to grab some clean clothes from the laundry. The basement had two entryways. One was from inside the house, and the other was from outside. It was an underground basement. As I went down to the laundry machines, I had to try and find the chain to pull and turn the lights on. I found it and turned on the light. I was facing the doorway leading to the outside when I switched it on. The moment the light came on, I saw something moving out behind the door in the stairwell. I immediately saw a man was standing there. Fortunately, the door was locked and it was a pretty heavy one. I guess the guy looked up at me when he noticed the light coming on. Our eyes locked for just a moment before the guy ran up the stairs and out of the home. I ran up the stairs as quickly as I could and made sure all the doors were locked. So were all the windows of the house as well. I then went to my parents' room and got my dad's gun out of the closet. I took the gun into my room and locked my bedroom door. I was terrified and thought that was the best case for me to be in case this man broke in again. Still, I waited for a while, and I didn't hear anything that indicated he was inside. After a really long period of time, I eventually fell asleep. The gun remained on my nightstand over the night. In the morning, I was woken up by the sun. I felt much better with the light out, and I searched through the home to find any signs of the man. Nothing I could see. That day, I took a gas can and my bicycle bag to get my car. I half expected it to not be there, but it was. I put the gas in and quickly drove home. I didn't tell my parents what happened, though. It would just make them worry, and they probably wouldn't let me go out driving again after that. I never did find out who it was that followed me home that day. Back when I lived in the rural Midwest about 10 years ago, I lived in a house just off the highway. My house was situated right between two towns, almost on the county line. It had a large circular driveway. If you drove into the driveway, you would head straight toward our barn. If you turned right, you could access our garage. Continuing past the garage allowed you to circle around in front of the house and return to where you started. Our house featured two large double doors in the front, which were rarely used really. Instead, we usually entered through the doors inside the garage. One night, it was very late, when suddenly the doorbell rang. My husband, our 3-year-old daughter, and I were all sound asleep. The sound woke me up right away, and at first I thought I must be dreaming. Then it rang again. I woke my husband. He initially believed I was hearing things, until it rang once more. It was very dark outside, but we had a dusk-to-dawn light that illuminated most of the driveway. Unfortunately, the front doors couldn't be seen through unless you opened one of them and looked outside. You could just open one at a time, or both simultaneously, using two latches located at the top and bottom of one of the doors. My husband wanted to open the door and see what was going on, while I just wanted to call the police. We knew it would take some time for them to arrive though, since we lived on the county line. He opened the door to find a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s. She appeared perfectly normal, except for the fact that she was standing at our door in the middle of the night. I looked beyond her and noticed her car parked in our driveway just off the road. She claimed that she needed to use the phone, explaining that her car battery had died or something. She wasn't sure, she said. I told my husband there was no way we should let her in, as this was exactly how horror movies often started. We offered to call the police or the county sheriff to help her, but she kept insisting. We assured her we would make the call, and eventually she just walked away. As we watched her return to her car, which was approximately 50 feet away by my distance judgment, I could see both her and the car quite clearly. I proceeded to call the police, and they said they'd arrive in about 15 minutes. At this point, neither my husband nor I were overly concerned about it. We assumed it really was just a girl with a dead battery. As she opened her trunk, no lights illuminated, and she began rummaging around inside. At that point, the driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out, followed by others, exiting from the back passenger door. They continued to search the trunk with no lights on. I couldn't hear any of their conversations or determine their actions, but eventually they all returned to the car. About 5 minutes had passed now, and I was silently praying the sheriff would hurry up and arrive. I knew it would probably take another 10 minutes or so, though. The individuals remained in the vehicle, lights off and motionless. I couldn't see them clearly inside, but I knew they hadn't exited or done anything. I thought I could see the driver lighting a cigarette, but I couldn't be entirely sure. Then something unexpected occurred. A man who I didn't recognize emerged from the right side of the property, walking from the direction of the barn. We didn't have neighbors for at least a mile around, and he appeared to be coming from the back of our property, which ended at a random creek. He walked directly under the dusk-to-dawn light and proceeded straight to the car without even looking at our home. He got into the back, and the vehicle started up. They slowly backed out of my driveway and headed north. The police arrived approximately 10 minutes later, and by that point I was in a state of panic. They conducted a search but couldn't find anything suspicious. They asked if we had noted the license plate number, but the car had been parked too far away. They advised us to call if the individuals returned, which didn't instill much confidence. My husband retrieved his shotgun from the workshop on our property, and we attempted to go back to sleep. This happened to me about 4 years ago. I was living with a roommate in an apartment complex. in a somewhat bad area. It wasn't terrible, but it was right by a busy road that seemed to attract a lot of crime. As a woman, it's the kind of place you didn't want to walk around at night. I had and have been harassed almost every time. This was before I had a car. It was about 3 a.m., and my roommate was dead asleep. I was awake, who knows why. I was in my room on the computer when I heard her knock at the door. It was literally just one knock. I took off my headphones to make sure I was even actually hearing this. After a few seconds of pausing, another knock came, and then began a steady rhythm. It wasn't your typical someone knocking at the door wanting to see you. It was a slow and continuous knock, almost like a heartbeat. Instantly, I was somewhat alarmed, but decided to leave it alone. I decided I would wait and see if maybe it was some drunk who had gotten confused and would huddle off after a while. Minutes passed by and the knocking never stopped though. It never picked up or slowed down either. It was just this continuous rhythm. After some time, I heard the person try for the doorknob. Instantly, I feared for my life. Without waking my roommate, I went to the living room and shouted through the door, "Who is it?" The knocking suddenly stopped altogether. I decided to look out through the peephole and see who it was. I know this sounds like a horror movie, but I saw nothing. At that point, I backed away, and after I did, the knocking immediately resumed. My shouting had woken up my roommate, who was now asking what the hell was going on. I told her that someone was knocking at the door, and they must have been hiding around the side, because I couldn't see anybody there. We called the police, and they arrived about 10 minutes later. During that 10 minutes, my roommate and I locked ourselves inside the bathroom. Whoever the psycho was outside kept doing that slow and rhythmic knocking. Once the cops showed up, we were safe to come out. We got a good look at who was doing this to us. It was a boy no older than 18. They had him restrained and had confiscated a backpack from him. Inside the backpack was a shocking amount of drugs, and even worse, a knife. I had never seen this kid before, but we were told he lived across the parking lot from us in the exact same complex. The kid wouldn't say what he was doing here, but the contents of his backpack sent a deep chill through my body. I'm certain he was planning to use the drugs on us, and then assault and possibly kill us. The kid was arrested and jailed for some time, not long enough in my opinion. After he was released, I heard he ran away. He had been living with his dad at the apartments, but I haven't heard about him or seen him ever since. My roommate and I moved to a nicer area after this event. I seriously hope that guy gets locked up again, because it's clear he had every intent to attack us, and I have no doubts he'd try it again. I'll never forget the way he kept knocking at our door, how it filled me with a sense of dread I had never felt in my life. Whenever I was asked to babysit my niece, I would often take her out for a drive. She loved the mountains and the forest, especially the winding roads in that area. As we were driving along on this night, we saw a sign which said driving course. I guess there was some sort of event there, or there would be an event coming up soon. I figured that since it was a quiet kind of evening, I could take my niece along this course. It said it was open to the public, so it wasn't like I was trespassing or anything. We were having a great time chatting and driving through the mountainous roads, seeing all sorts of stuff along the way. Hot spring spots, nocturnal wildlife. We even stopped at a restaurant along the course too. It was a nice change of pace. I work in an office all day, and I rarely get to go out and enjoy nature in my time off like this. I was happy to spend time with my niece, and that she was here so I had an excuse to go out on a ride. I was picking up a little speed, and we were both having a great time. At one point, my niece spotted a little dirt road off the side of the main mountain pass and pleaded with me to explore down there. It was getting a little bit late, but I couldn't resist giving in to her demands. I told her that after we had just a little look, we would turn right back around and head home. She agreed to my terms. It turned out that going off this road was a really terrible idea. We had gotten about 200 meters down this dirt path when I suddenly hit something with my front tire. I didn't know what the hell I'd just done to my car. Maybe I bent the axle or something. It was a pretty harrowing experience to realize that I was both in trouble and responsible for my niece's safety. We were both shaken up. We had just hit something with enough force for it to cut out the engine. To be honest, I was kind of surprised the airbags didn't go off. Anyway, I was the adult and I had to be calm. But to be honest, I was a bit nervous. I'm a woman as well, and it was just me and my niece out there in the middle of nowhere in these dark and mountainous woods. With each passing moment, it grew darker and darker. I grabbed my phone out of my purse and went to dial my roadside rescue service. When I saw I had no signal, I started to get those vibes from horror films I'd watched as a teen. I knew I had to push on for the sake of my niece, though. I didn't know what to do. There was no way I would be able to just leave her in the car and walk down the mountain to the nearest building, which I guess would have been the restaurant we'd come from. That would have been irresponsible. For some reason, my niece wasn't even frightened by the situation. Perhaps she felt a little guilty. She didn't freak out or start crying. She handled the situation very maturely. I was at least grateful for that. I told her we had a couple of options. We could wait here, lock the doors, and when there was a little more light out, I could go out and try to get some signal. Or, if she really thought it would be alright, I could leave her in the car and try to go by myself while it was dark out. She didn't want to be left alone in the dark, obviously. I could have guessed that much. I started trying the engine, but I had no luck. It seemed as if we were in a really quiet area. When the wind whistled through the trees, it made me feel frightened. There were many wild things in these woods, and they had the cover of darkness on their side now. We sat there for a while, chatting and trying to lighten the tension. My niece started to yawn, and I checked my phone to see what time it was. I was shocked to see that now I somehow had a bar of signal. I called the roadside rescue instantly. The phone held on to the signal long enough for me to get some help. I was told to sit tight, lock the doors, and wait for the recovery vehicle to arrive. We both ate quite a lot at the all-you-can-eat restaurant we went to earlier, and because of this, we were both very drowsy at that point. I closed my eyes for a little while. When I opened them again, I looked over at my niece and saw she was fast asleep. As my eyes opened more, I could see it was colder and darker when I'd woken up. At that point, I heard some weird and horrible noise. It sounded like someone's voice. It was distant, but it sounded like it was getting closer. I couldn't really tell exactly how far away it was. It sounded like a screaming sound, this indescribable wailing crossed with a screech. Whatever it was approaching our location. I knew that much. I thought it could have been my imagination, making things more frightening than they already were. I just told myself that if I closed my eyes, whatever was frightening me would soon pass. The sound continued until it suddenly stopped. It sounded like it stopped right beside our car. A few agonizing seconds crawled by. I realized that I couldn't convince myself that this was just my mind playing tricks on me. It felt as if there was a very real threat right outside the driver's door. I slowly opened my eyes and turned my head to face the window. I could see nothing but a dark figure there. Something covered completely in black was pressed up against the window. I don't know how to describe it any better, really. Just a solid black mass pressed up against it. I lost it when I saw that. I instinctively released the handbrake and tried to start the engine. To my surprise, it actually sputtered to life. I hit reverse, and when I backed up, the thing was revealed in the light of my headlights. It was a person wearing a black cloak. My niece woke up, but thankfully I don't think she saw that figure. If she did, then she never mentioned it to me. I managed to reverse back to the start of the dirt road. I waited there for roadside rescue to arrive. When we were towed from the woods back to a light source, I looked at the driver's side window. There were clear handprints and smudges of what looked to be someone's face on the glass. It really frightened me. I'm glad I didn't decide to leave my niece in the car to go search for a signal. I have no clue what that person wanted, but if they were out there in the middle of nowhere in the mountains like that, I guess it couldn't have been anything remotely positive. I'm a woman, and when I was about 15 years old or so, my parents asked if I wanted to get out of the house with them. I said sure, and we stopped off at a local place for some gas, drinks, and some cigarettes for my mom. As usual, my dad went in to grab the stuff, while my mom sat in the car in the passenger seat, and I stayed with her in the seat behind. At some point, I noticed a creepy man, clearly homeless in his mid to late 30s. He was at the payphone about 10 to 15 feet away from our car. He was talking on the phone, but he never took his eyes off me or my mom. I'll never forget it because of the song that was playing, Never There. It all felt very unsettling in the moment. I asked my mom if she had noticed the guy staring too, and she said yes and to just ignore him. My dad eventually exited the store, and upon getting into the car and starting the engine, the doors automatically locked. Thank God for this feature, because what happened next will always stick with me. We had just started the car, and within about 5 seconds of us starting to back out, I saw the guy running towards the rear driver's side. He had something in his hand, wrapped in a towel or cloth. He made a point to try and conceal it behind his back. He grabbed the door on the rear driver's side, as if he just expected to climb right in. Since it was locked, though, the man just looked at us and then mouthed that he was so sorry, all while waving his free hand, despite the fact the other one was still behind his back. He kept trying to force the car door open again. I guess he thought that after the first time, we would unlock it for some reason so we could get in. I'm not sure what exactly he wanted, but his intentions felt dark. I swear that he wanted to carjack us and hurt me or my mom, possibly even my dad. As we drove away, we called the cops on him. We watched as we left the parking lot, and the guy ran to a nearby mailbox, then hid away whatever he had previously concealed behind his back inside. I don't know what that guy had planned or what his problem was, but I really hope he got some help. This happened years ago, when I had gotten my first actual job. I didn't think much of it. I figured it was quite harmless. I could find people around the country to chat with, learn about some other cultures, all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't give out personal information about myself. No phone number, no address, or anything like that. I wasn't stupid. What I'm referring to, by the way, is having a pen pal. You see, I was bored with no friends in my city. All my friends were back in my hometown. I wanted to fill my time in and drown out the loneliness. Talk to people I heard about on these websites to meet pen pals around the world. I made a simple profile and stated what kind of friends I was interested in making. Basic stuff, really. After about a month, I received a message from a guy. I don't remember it word for word, but it basically said something like, "Hi, just found your profile. I'm super interested in being friends with you." He stated he lived in the same state as me. Even though he was 58 years old, he seemed really chill. I know maybe it was a little rude to be snobby about someone in my state contacting me, but I did say on my profile that I was trying to find pen pals outside of the US. I did reply to a few of his messages before declining him, though. I found out that he lived in the same city as me even. I see you like anime. I love anime. I also see that you've been to Japan. I've been to Japan too. Do you go to anime conventions? Maybe we can go together to the next one that comes to town. I felt more and more uncomfortable. I had also put right on my page that I had no intentions of meeting up with anyone, just having an online pen pal. I politely told him that, and he really didn't like it. He said, "I just thought we could be friends since we have similar interests." I again told him I was not interested in meeting anyone in person from the website. He pretended to be fine with it and went right back to rambling about his own interests. I logged out of the website for a few days and just focused on my own personal life. Going to work, doing school, taking care of my disabled father. One day I woke up to some notifications on multiple of my instant messaging apps. They were all basically saying the same thing. "Hey, it's me from the pen pal website," smiley face. He messaged me on 4 different apps, which I had not given him. How did he find them? I was really annoyed by this point. As politely as I could, I messaged him on the pen pal website. "Hey, so I don't know how you find my IDs for chat apps, but that was over the line, really not appropriate. It would be one thing if it was on one app, but you messaged me on 4 different ones." He replied instantly, "I'm sorry, I really wanted to talk to you, and you haven't been on the site for days." Well, that doesn't make it okay to do that. I also have a personal life, a job and a family. I can't spend all my time on here. Well, that's why I messaged you on those apps. I don't have them listed on my profile. How did you even find them? He completely avoided the subject and insisted he just wanted to be friends with me. I told him I didn't think we should talk anymore, and that I didn't want to be friends with him at that point, and to never contact me again. I immediately blocked him on all of those apps and on the pen pal website. For a few months, everything was perfectly fine. Suddenly, I got a message on one of those apps, and the user wasn't in my friends list. The message was basically as follows: "You stupid, fat, ugly girl. No one will ever love you. You'll never find a man to love you. You're so incredibly fat and ugly. Why don't you just take your own life and do the world a favor?" I rolled my eyes and blocked the account. Through the course of a year, every few months across my multiple social media platforms, I would be harassed. Eventually, though, I completely forgot about the man. That is, until I received a message on the pen pal website. The account had no name or photos. It was just a randomly generated username. The message I had received was the same nonsense as before, calling me fat and ugly and saying all sorts of terrible things about me, telling me I should just die. Once I got that message, I knew it had to be him again. I had no issues with anyone else. I replied saying the guy's name, telling him I knew it was him and that his behavior was sad and pathetic. "I just wanted to be your friend. You're disgusting. Will you watch your back then?" The account blocked me, and for a few more months, nothing really happened. I would get 1 or 2 messages from fake accounts every now and then, but I had grown used to it by this point, and I just immediately blocked them. One day, I received a Facebook message from a police officer contacting me about a profile I apparently made on a website called Ashley Madison. It's used for people to have affairs and hookups, I guess. I had never heard of it before then, and I absolutely did not have an account on there. I had a long talk with him, where he told me his department investigates human trafficking, and he thought I was an underage girl possibly in danger. I had my personal accounts listed on the profile, as well as other ways to contact me. I was in shock. He advised me to contact the website and asked them to take down the profile. He also added, "You seem like a real nice girl. I don't know who you made angry, but don't read what's on there." My curiosity got the better of me, though. I should have taken his advice. This guy had taken some of my selfies and made an account of me. The profile stated a lot of horrible things, very derogatory, so much so that I can't even list them here. It made me feel sick to my stomach to read some of the things it said I apparently wanted to have done to me. Thankfully, the website took quick action to take the profile down. The next time I got one of those hate messages online, I snapped. I didn't hold back at all. I cursed him out for being so disgusting, simply because someone didn't want to be his friend. His account immediately blocked me without answering. I didn't get a message from any accounts for a while. One day, when I was a closer at work, I was waiting outside for my family member to come pick me up. I didn't have my own vehicle, and my family would give me rides to and from work. As I was listening to some music, waving goodbye to my manager as they drove off, I got a message on one of my apps. It said, "You're disgusting and ugly." I rolled my eyes as I opened the message. I was going to type in a witty retort, but something came in that made me stop typing and freeze up. "You're all alone. I could kill you right now if I wanted to. No one would ever find you." I backed up against the building. I didn't have keys, only the manager did, and they had just left. I looked around to the parking lot, not a car in sight. The streetlights shined dimly around me, and my heart started to race as more messages came in. "You're so disgusting. You know no one will ever fall in love with you. Your family probably won't even miss you. You're so gross. I should just kill you right now and do the world a favor." I started to cry, my hands shaking. Just as another text came in, a car pulled up in front of me. It was my family member coming to pick me up. I took a deep breath and quickly got into the car. I screamed at them to leave right now. Tears started to come down my face, and they asked me what was wrong. I handed them my phone, and they looked through it and saw the messages. They asked who it was, but I couldn't tell them. I didn't know who it was. I just wanted to get out of there. We went back to their place, and they called the police. I tried to tell them not to. I had no idea who this person was or where to find them. They also called another family member who worked in the IT field. After they heard the whole story about everything I'd endured for almost 2 years now, they told me I should have made some new accounts from the beginning of this harassment. I listened to them right then and there, and made new accounts on all of my social media. I worked at that job for another month, but my family member had told my manager what had happened, so I was never put on closing shifts again. I was only given morning ones, where I clocked out of work when the sun was still out. I still didn't feel safe though. They knew where I worked now. My manager understood when I quit, and all the harassment stopped suddenly. To this day, I still haven't received any more of those messages. I'm married now, and still live in that city. I don't live in the same neighborhood anymore, though. I feel comfortable and don't feel afraid this person will find me and stalk me again. Even now, though, anytime I get a random message from someone who isn't in my friends list, my heart races for just a moment. The year was 1991. I was in 3rd grade and my older sister was in 5th. We attended an elementary school that was just a few blocks away from our childhood home. We lived one street over from my grandparents. Our neighborhood had a lot of children, and there were usually adults outside working in the garden or fixing cars. One day, after we were dropped off, we decided to go visit our grandfather. He worked nights as an airplane mechanic for the Air Force. My grandparents' house had a huge privacy fence, and we would drop in from time to time. If the gate was locked, though, we would just turn around and go home. As we were about to cross the street, we saw a man blocking our path, staring us down. The man looked like he must have benched semi-trucks in his spare time. Aside from us and this brute, the streets were completely deserted. If we cried out for help, I don't think anyone was outside that would hear us. Just our luck. The one day the street was empty, we encountered this steroid-addicted lunatic. The man immediately began charging towards us. "You two are coming with me." That was our cue to start running. Due to a recent surgery I'd had on my ankle, I was having trouble keeping up. My sister put me on her shoulders and bolted down an alleyway that led back to our house. We raced to the front door and began beating on it, but unfortunately nobody was home. We looked behind us as the man emerged from the alley. Just then, our next-door neighbor, who was an older woman, came outside to see what the commotion was. She was holding a shotgun in her hands. When she saw how frightened we were, she looked at the imposing man coming towards us and instantly put 2 and 2 together. She raised her gun and pointed it right at the man. "You leave those kids alone or say goodbye." The man stopped in his tracks and raised his hands in the air. He slowly backed away and eventually disappeared down the alley. My sister called the police, and then our dad. The police never found out who that man was, although there were some other abductions of children around our area. They were suspected to be linked to human trafficking. I'm very thankful our neighbor intervened with her gun that day, because otherwise my sister and I could have never been seen again. This incident occurred a few years ago, on the day I was scheduled to take my driving test actually. In an effort to ensure I passed on my first attempt, I'd enrolled in a driving cram school. As part of my preparation, I had a private lesson booked in the city just before my test. This required me to catch an early train to ensure my timely arrival. I proceeded to the local train station and waited for the arrival of the first train of the day. This particular train was new to me. Although I was quite tired, I compelled myself to study. I found a seat on a bench nearby and began using a driving test prep app. Additionally, I sent messages to my friends, asking them to wish me luck once they woke up. Approximately 10 minutes later, a train pulled in on the opposite side of the tracks from me. I recognized this as a sign that my own train would be soon arriving. Placing my bag over my shoulder, I joined the line of people waiting to board the train. Suddenly, a voice from behind me remarked, "You're looking really cute." I turned to see a man in his 30s approaching me. My immediate thoughts was, "Don't make me feel so sick this early in the morning." I averted my gaze from him, noting that he appeared to be more than a decade older than me. While standing in line, the man followed closely behind me. I tried to ignore him and positioned myself to the side to try and distance myself from him. However, he continued to silently trail me. He continued to call out to me, his unsettling voice sounding again from right behind my shoulder. I truly had no interest in engaging with this guy. I didn't want to add more stress to my day before the driving test. Seeking any refuge, I moved closer to a trio of office workers, hoping their presence would discourage this stranger from further advances. I also hoped they might intervene if the man persisted in trying to follow me. For a while, I had my back to him, intentionally avoiding eye contact. I was curious if he had left though, so after a brief moment I glanced backward. Thankfully, he seemed to have disappeared, relieving me of his unnerving presence. When the train arrived, I boarded with the group of office workers. Strangely enough, the encounter with that creeper gave me a profound new sense of confidence for the impending test. The workers took seats right next to me, and the train departed. Given that my stop was about 20 minutes away, I utilized the time to study further on my phone. Suddenly, though, I felt an odd sensation, the feeling of someone's gaze fixating on me. I looked up from my phone, casually scanning my surroundings, and my eyes settled upon the source of my unease. About 3 meters ahead, the same man who had approached me earlier on the platform was openly staring at me. He didn't break eye contact or even blink at all. His gaze was unwavering. I felt a wave of nausea. Had he been wandering the train searching for me? It certainly seemed that way. This man, who I found increasingly unnerving, made me feel uneasy, especially considering my circumstances. I was an 18-year-old woman traveling alone. The remaining 10 minutes of the ride felt like an eternity, and in my mind I repeatedly prayed that I'd be safe. Finally, we arrived at my destination. The last leg of this ride had been one of the longest and most unsettling periods of my life. As I stepped off the train, I could hardly shake off my fear. I felt as though I'd nearly escaped something dreadful. I found myself even pondering whether I knew this person or not. His persistent staring left me wondering if maybe he'd mistaken me for someone else, or perhaps I'd met him before and forgotten him. Fortunately, the 3 office workers seated next to me were also apparently disembarking at the same station, which led me to conclude that I could use them as a protective barrier once again. I positioned myself within their group as we passed through the ticket gate. Aware that my driving class was just a 3-minute walk from the station, I decided to run over there. Immediately upon exiting the gate and descending the stairs in haste, I could hear rapid footsteps behind me. There's no way, I thought. On instinct, I turned around to identify the source of those footsteps, only to find the man running after me about 10 steps above me. He was staring at me with this dead gaze and smiling. An icy shiver ran through me, and fear gripped me like never before. I sprinted as fast as I could, and finally reached my class. I was panting, and looked rather out of place compared to the composed students and adults around me. I doubted anyone else had entered class like that. After completing some paperwork and formalities, I finally sat down at a desk. As I happened to gaze out of the window, I could see the man was waiting outside staring at me, standing in front of the station. When our eyes met, he smiled and waved at me. A chill ran down my spine. In the midst of a classroom full of strangers I didn't know, I grappled with whether to confide in someone or ask for help. I felt unable to open up to anyone. I felt isolated, as everyone around me was completely unfamiliar. Nonetheless, I managed to push the unsettling encounter from my mind and focus on my driving test for the moment. Perhaps the man would be gone by the time I was done. Miraculously, I still did well on both the written and practical tests. Passing them filled me with elation and joy, nearly causing me to forget the unsettling events earlier in the day. I went about with the rest of it. It was long and filled with various errands, spanning for about 8 hours or so. Once I'd concluded all my tasks, I headed back to the train station to catch the train home. Returning to where the morning's events had unfolded, a clear recollection of earlier that day flooded back to me. I questioned what that was all even about. Did I know this man? Was I overreacting? After the passage of such a long day, certainty seemed elusive. Approaching the bicycle parking area, I wondered whether I may have just blown the situation out of proportion. However, as fate would have it, the man was still there. A surge of fear rushed through me. I was paralyzed by his presence, annoyed by my own helplessness. I pivoted and raced over to the station staff, confessing my concerns about the man following me for the entire day. I contacted my father, who fortunately had wrapped up with work by then, and arrived by car 10 minutes later. To our relief, the man had vanished. It was more fortunate for him than anything, though, as my father was seething in anger by that point. In hindsight, though it may have seemed impulsive in the moment, I'm grateful I'd turned back around and sought assistance from the station staff. Sometimes I reflect on the potential outcomes of that evening and consider how important it can be to ask someone around you for help. Had I not taken that step, I don't know what would have happened to me. The fact the man was there waiting for me right as I arrived is chilling. I wonder how long he had been lurking there. As a result of that harrowing experience, I no longer ride the train alone. I now much prefer driving. The incident reinforced the significance of having a driving license to me. Despite being on a train full of passengers, the man had been brazen enough to pursue me without any regard for witnesses, even continuing to stalk me in a classroom full of people. It's unsettling to think individuals like him are out there, posing dangers to the general public. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.